Evelyn Whitmore had everything: first-class seats, designer everything, and a screaming baby that wouldn't stop. Malik Thompson had nothing but his grandmother's songs in 12 hours to reach an audition that would change his life. When Charlotte's cries drove passengers to rage and her mother to tears at 30,000 feet, nobody expected the black kid from Economy to be their salvation. But as Malik's voice filled the cabin, inherited from a grandmother who sang through impossible odds, and Charlotte fell silent for the first time in hours, everyone would learn that sometimes the most powerful gifts come from the people we overlook, and the songs that save us cost nothing at all. The departure gate at JFK International Airport buzzed with the familiar chaos of boarding time. Business-class passengers glided through their priority lane with practiced ease, their designer luggage rolling silently behind them. In the general boarding area, families juggled backpacks and crying toddlers. College students scrolled through phones with earbuds firmly planted, and exhausted travelers nursed overpriced coffee. Evelyn Whitmore adjusted her Hermes bag for the third time, trying to balance it with the designer diaper bag that seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. In her arms, 6-month-old Charlotte squirmed and fussed, her tiny face already red with the beginnings of what promised to be a spectacular meltdown. The baby's perfectly coordinated outfit, a miniature version of something that belonged in a boutique window, was already wrinkled from the struggle. Charlotte, please," Evelyn whispered, her voice tight with barely contained anxiety. She bounced the baby gently, a motion that had worked exactly once in the past week. Around her, other passengers cast quick glances, some sympathetic, most annoyed. She could practically feel their thoughts. Another crying baby on a long flight. Perfect. A few rows back in the economy boarding line, 13-year-old Malik Thompson stood quietly beside his aunt. His clothes told a different story than Evelyn's polished appearance. A faded Chicago Bulls jersey that had seen better days, jeans with frayed cuffs that were just a bit too short, and sneakers held together more by determination than actual structural integrity. But his eyes, those were something else entirely. Dark and observant. They took in everything around him with a quiet intensity that seemed beyond his years. "You got your boarding pass?" His Aunt Rosa asked for the fourth time, her own anxiety showing through. "Yes, Aunt Rosa," Malik replied softly, patting his pocket where the crumpled ticket rested. He'd been holding it so tightly earlier that the ink had smudged, but the important parts were still readable. This flight meant everything. Tomorrow morning's audition at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music was his shot, maybe his only shot, at something bigger than the cramped apartment he'd shared with his grandmother until 2 months ago. The boarding process moved with agonizing slowness. Charlotte's fussing escalated to crying, then to full-throated wailing that echoed through the gate area. Evelyn's face flushed deeper with each passing second. She fumbled with a bottle, trying to prepare formula one-handed while holding her screaming daughter. "I can hold her for a second if you need," a woman nearby offered. "No, thank you, I've got it," Evelyn said quickly, too quickly. The thought of handing Charlotte to a stranger, of admitting she couldn't handle this, made her stomach clench. She was Evelyn Whitmore. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Yale, had run successful marketing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, had navigated boardrooms full of condescending men without breaking a sweat. She could certainly handle her own baby. Finally, they boarded. The contrast between business class and economy was immediate and stark. Up front, wide seats beckoned with their promise of comfort. Flight attendants offered pre-flight champagne and warm towels. In economy, passengers squeezed past each other in the narrow aisle, shoving bags into overhead compartments that seemed to shrink with each piece of luggage. Malik found his seat, 32B, a middle seat near the back. The elderly black woman in 32, looked up from her book and smiled warmly. "Hello, young man," she said, her voice carrying the soft cadence of the South. "Looks like we're travel companions today." "Yes, ma'am," Malik replied politely, sliding into his seat after stowing his worn backpack overhead. "I'm Lila," she said, extending a hand. "Ms. Lila Carter." "Malik," he replied, shaking her hand gently. Something about her reminded him of his grandmother. The same warm eyes, the same way of making you feel seen. Meanwhile, Evelyn had settled into her business class seat. But settled was a generous term. Charlotte's cries had reached a pitch that seemed physically impossible for such a small human to produce. Evelyn tried everything: the bottle, a pacifier, the Sophie the giraffe toy that had cost an absurd amount for what was essentially a rubber squeaker. Nothing worked. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a smooth flight to New York today." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight time will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. 5 hours. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. 5 hours of this, with everyone watching, judging, thinking she was a terrible mother. Which maybe she was. What kind of mother couldn't comfort her own baby? As the plane began to taxi, Charlotte's cries intensified. The businessman in 4B, a heavy-set white man in an expensive suit, made no effort to hide his irritation. He flagged down a flight attendant with the imperious wave of someone used to being immediately accommodated. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of entitled complaint. "I paid for business class specifically to avoid this kind of disturbance. Can't something be done?" The flight attendant, a professional smile frozen on her face, responded smoothly. "I understand your concern, sir. Perhaps I can offer you some noise-canceling headphones." "Headphones?" He scoffed. "I shouldn't need headphones in business class. This is ridiculous." Evelyn heard every word. Her face burned with humiliation. She wanted to snap back, to tell him that she'd paid for business class too, that she had every right to be here with her baby. But Charlotte chose that moment to escalate from crying to screaming, a sound that seemed to pierce directly through everyone's skulls. In row 32, Malik hummed quietly to himself. It was an old habit, something his grandmother had taught him. When the world gets too loud, she'd said, "You make your own music." The tune was something she'd sung to him countless nights when the sirens outside their apartment window got too loud, when the neighbors' fighting shook the thin walls, when his stomach hurt from hunger because the money had run out before the month did. Ms. Lila noticed the humming. She tilted her head slightly, listening. There was something about the melody, something familiar that she couldn't quite place. "That's a pretty tune," she said softly. Malik stopped, embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." No, don't apologize. Music is never something to apologize for." She studied him with interest. "You sing?" "Sometimes," Malik admitted. "My grandma taught me. She said music could fix just about anything that was broken." "Smart woman," Ms. Lila said. "She's still with us?" Malik shook his head, his throat suddenly tight. "2 months ago." "I'm sorry, baby," Ms. Lila said, and somehow the endearment didn't feel patronizing. It felt like coming home. The plane lifted off, and with the change in pressure, Charlotte's screams reached a new level of hysteria. Evelyn was openly struggling now, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She tried walking the aisle, but the seatbelt sign was still on. She tried every position, holding Charlotte facing out, facing in, over her shoulder, across her lap. Nothing worked. "For God's sake," the businessman muttered, not quite under his breath. "Some people shouldn't travel with children if they can't control them." That did it. Evelyn felt something inside her crack. "I'm trying," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm doing everything I can." "Well, clearly it's not enough," he shot back. The tension in the cabin was palpable now. Other passengers were torn between sympathy for Evelyn and agreement with the businessman. A crying baby on a long flight, everyone's nightmare. Malik's humming grew slightly louder, almost unconsciously. The melody was more complex than a simple lullaby. It had layers, harmonies that seemed to weave in and out of each other. A few passengers nearby noticed, their expressions softening slightly. But when the humming became audible several rows away, Evelyn snapped. She turned around, her eyes wild with frustration and exhaustion. "Can you please stop that? You're not helping. I don't need more noise right now." Malik immediately went silent, shrinking back into his seat. His face burned with embarrassment. He'd only been trying to self-soothe, not to bother anyone. Ms. Lila patted his hand gently. "Don't mind her, honey," she whispered. "Stress makes people say things they don't mean." But the damage was done. Malik folded into himself, making his already small frame even smaller. He stared at the seat back in front of him, wishing he could disappear entirely. Charlotte's screams reached a hysterical pitch that seemed impossible to sustain. Her little face had gone from red to purple, her entire body rigid with distress. Flight attendants rushed over, offering suggestions, trying different techniques. One brought a warm bottle, another a different type of pacifier. Someone suggested maybe Charlotte's ears were hurting from the pressure. Nothing worked. Evelyn was openly crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she rocked Charlotte desperately. "Please, baby, please," she whispered. "Mommy doesn't know what to do. I don't know what you need." The businessman had called for the head flight attendant, demanding to be moved to a different seat. Other passengers were putting in earbuds, turning up music, anything to block out the sound. The baby's cries had become the only thing anyone could focus on, a sonic assault that made rational thought impossible. And then, cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter, came a voice. It started soft, so soft that at first people weren't sure they were hearing it. But Malik had leaned forward in his seat, his eyes closed, and begun to sing. Not the humming from before, but actual words, though the language was unclear, maybe English, maybe something else, maybe something in between. The melody was haunting, beautiful in its simplicity, but there was something else to it, something that made people stop what they were doing and listen. Charlotte paused mid-scream. The sudden absence of crying was so shocking that for a moment, nobody moved. The baby hiccuped once, twice, her huge eyes searching for the source of the sound. Her little head turned, and even though Malik was rows away, she seemed to lock onto his voice like a ship finding a lighthouse in a storm. The cabin went completely silent except for Malik's voice, floating through the recycled air like something magic. Malik's voice filled the hushed cabin with a gentle power that seemed impossible from such a young boy. The song wasn't anything most passengers could identify, not a pop song or a classical piece, but something that felt older, deeper. It rose and fell like breathing, like waves against the shore, like a mother's heartbeat heard from the womb. Charlotte's purple face slowly faded back to pink. Her rigid body relaxed, tiny fists uncurling. She hiccuped again, a small sound that might have been the beginning of more tears, but then Malik's voice shifted slightly, adding a soft vibrato that seemed to catch her attention completely. Her eyes, still wet with tears, focused with an intensity that seemed impossible for a 6-month-old. "My God," someone whispered a few rows back. Evelyn stared at her daughter in complete disbelief. Charlotte, who had been inconsolable for the past hour, who had resisted every attempt at comfort, was now completely calm. More than calm, she seemed mesmerized. Her tiny mouth formed a perfect O of wonder. The passengers' reactions rippled through the cabin in waves. A mother traveling with her own 2 children smiled with genuine relief and gratitude. An older couple exchanged amazed glances, the woman reaching over to squeeze her husband's hand. A group of college students had their phones out, recording the moment. But not everyone was moved. The businessman in 4B scoffed loudly. "It's just coincidence," he declared to anyone within earshot. The baby was bound to tire herself out eventually. Pure luck. A flight attendant, still standing in the aisle from her failed attempts to help, shook her head slightly. "I've been flying for 15 years, she said quietly. That wasn't luck. Evelyn's mind raced with conflicting emotions. Relief warred with humiliation, gratitude with resentment. This boy, this poor boy in his worn-out clothes, had succeeded where she, with all her education and resources, had failed completely. Her cheeks burned with a complicated shame. She was Charlotte's mother. She should have been the one to comfort her daughter. Instead, it had taken a stranger, a child from economy class, to do what she couldn't. Malik kept singing, his eyes still closed, seemingly unaware of the attention he'd drawn. But Ms. Lila, watching him carefully, could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests. He knew everyone was watching. He knew, and he kept singing anyway. In his mind, Malik wasn't on a plane at all. He was back in his grandmother's apartment, sitting on the worn floral couch that had been there as long as he could remember. It was one of those nights when the heat had been cut off again and they'd huddled together under every blanket they owned. His grandmother's voice had been weak by then. The cancer had taken so much from her, but she'd still sung. Music heals even the heaviest heart. Baby, she'd whispered between verses. When everything else fails, when the world seems too dark, you sing. You sing for yourself. You sing for others. You sing because sometimes it's the only light we can make. He'd memorized every note, every word, every breath she took between phrases. It was all he had left of her now. These songs that lived in his chest, in his throat, in the spaces between his heartbeats. Charlotte made a small sound. Not distress, but something almost like recognition. Her tiny hand reached out, not toward her mother, but toward the aisle, toward wherever that magical voice was coming from. And then, impossibly, she giggled. It was a perfect sound, pure baby joy that seemed to break whatever spell had held the cabin frozen. Several passengers actually applauded. Others laughed with relief. The tension that had been building like a storm broke apart, leaving something lighter in its wake. Evelyn's carefully constructed defenses cracked. Her daughter, who had been nothing but tears and screams for hours, was giggling, reaching for a stranger's voice, choosing someone else's comfort over hers. Ow, she found herself whispering. The flight attendant who'd been helping leaned down. Some people just have the gift, she said gently. Would you like me to thank him for you? No, Evelyn said quickly, too quickly. The thought of publicly acknowledging that she'd needed help, that she'd failed where this boy had succeeded, was too much. No, I'll handle it. The flight attendant moved back to row 32, where Malik was finally letting his voice fade to a soft hum. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and he jumped slightly, eyes flying open. That was beautiful, she said simply. Thank you. Malik ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. She just needed something familiar, he mumbled. Babies like rhythm. It reminds them of before. Before, the flight attendant asked. Before they were born. Heartbeats and stuff. He shrugged, trying to make himself smaller again. My grandma told me that. Ms. Lila was studying him with new interest. Your grandmother taught you that song? Malik nodded. She knew lots of them. So they came from her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, all the way back to slavery times. Songs for getting through things. Getting through things, Ms. Lila repeated softly. Yes, that's exactly what they're for. Meanwhile, the cabin had divided into invisible camps. There were those who thought Malik was some kind of baby whisperer, a miracle worker who'd save them all from hours of screaming. They smiled at him when they caught his eye, nodded their appreciation, whispered among themselves about what a special gift he had. But there were others who saw it differently. They looked at Evelyn with a mixture of pity and judgment. What kind of mother couldn't soothe her own baby? What kind of person needed a child from economy to do her job for her? Their whispers were less kind, their glances sharp with criticism. She probably has a nanny for everything, one woman murmured to her husband. These rich women have babies as accessories, then can't handle the actual work. That's unfair, her husband replied, but quietly, without much conviction. The businessman in 4B was the worst. He made a point of catching Evelyn's eye and shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. Money can't buy everything, can it? He said, loud enough for several rows to hear. Evelyn wanted to disappear. She wanted to tell them all that she'd tried, that she'd read every parenting book, had taken classes, had done everything right. But Charlotte had been difficult from the start. Colicky, resistant to routines, impossible to predict. And her husband, always away on business, always telling her she was overreacting, that she needed to handle things better. Other women manage, he'd said just last week. I don't understand why you're making this so complicated. Charlotte squirmed in her arms, craning her little neck, still searching for the source of the singing. Malik had gone quiet now, shrinking back into his seat, but Charlotte wasn't having it. She let out a small whimper of protest. Before it could escalate, Malik hummed a few notes. Just a few, soft and almost inaudible, but Charlotte settled immediately. The flight attendant returned with a cart. Would you like something to drink? She asked Malik. On the house. It's the least we can do. Water's fine, ma'am, Malik said quietly. Are you sure? We have soda, juice, whatever you'd like. Water's fine, he repeated, and there was something in his tone that made her not push further. As she poured his water, she said, You know, in all my years of flying, I've never seen anything quite like that. You have a real gift. It's just singing, Malik mumbled. No, Ms. Lila interjected gently. It's more than that, and you know it. Don't diminish yourself, child. A teenager a few rows up had worked up the courage to lean over. Hey, man, where'd you learn to sing like that? You take lessons or something? Malik shook his head. Never had lessons. Just listen a lot. Sang with my grandma. That's it? No training. The teenager seemed amazed. Dude, you could be on one of those singing shows. You'd win for sure. I don't think, Malik started, but the teenager had already turned back to his friends, excitedly telling them about maybe knowing a future star. In business class, a wealthy woman in designer clothes had taken the seat next to Evelyn, while the businessman had stormed off to complain to the head flight attendant about the complete breakdown of premium service standards. Well, the woman said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, aren't we lucky that boy was here? Otherwise, we'd all be suffering through this whole flight. She paused, then added with surgical precision, though I suppose it must be embarrassing having to rely on a stranger's child. Evelyn forced her face into a neutral expression. Yes, lucky, she managed. Charlotte fussed again, and immediately, instinctively, Evelyn found herself looking back toward economy, toward where Malik sat. She caught herself and turned away, but not before the woman beside her noticed. You know, the woman continued, I heard the flight attendant say he's from Chicago. South Side, from the looks of it. Probably doesn't fly often. Must be overwhelming for him. There was something in her tone, something coded in the way she said South Side, that made Evelyn's stomach turn. But she didn't challenge it. She didn't have the energy, and besides, wasn't she guilty of her own assumptions? Hadn't she snapped at him earlier, dismissed him, treated him like his humming was just another irritation? Back in row 32, Ms. Lila was gently drawing Malik out of his shell. That song, she said carefully, the one you were singing. I feel like I've heard it before, but I can't place it. Grandma called it Bright Morning Star, Malik said. But she sang it different from how it's in them books. She said our version was older, from before things got written down. Your grandmother, Ms. Lila said thoughtfully. What was her name? Alma Thompson. Well, Alma Williams before she married my granddad. Ms. Lila's eyes widened slightly. Alma Williams from Chicago? Sang with the Southside Community Choir back in the 70s. Malik sat up straighter. You knew her? I didn't know her personally, but honey, everyone in the Chicago church music scene knew about Alma Williams. That woman had a voice that could make angels weep. She studied Malik with new interest, and it seems she passed that gift on to you. Malik's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. Since his grandmother's death, everyone had offered condolences, had said they were sorry for his loss. But this was the first time someone had talked about her like she was more than just his grandmother, like she'd been somebody important in her own right. Charlotte had been quiet for several minutes now, a record for the flight so far. But as Malik's conversation with Ms. Lila grew more animated, as his voice took on normal speaking tones instead of singing ones, she began to fuss again. Not crying yet, but the warning signs were there. The squirming, the little frustrated grunts, the face scrunching that preceded a meltdown. Evelyn felt her body tense. She reached for the bottle again, tried the pacifier again, bounced Charlotte gently. But she could feel it building, could sense another screaming fit approaching like a storm on the horizon. Without being asked, without even seeming to think about it, Malik began to hum again. Soft, almost under his breath, but somehow it carried. Charlotte's face smoothed out. Her body relaxed. And then she did something she hadn't done in hours. She smiled. A real, genuine baby smile that transformed her whole face. Evelyn finally broke. Her pride, her embarrassment, her carefully maintained composure. None of it mattered as much as that smile. She turned in her seat, looking back toward economy, trying to spot the boy who'd done what she couldn't. When she finally located him, that small figure in the faded Bulls jersey, she found him looking down at his hands, seemingly unaware of the miracle he'd just performed. Again, excuse me, she said to the flight attendant. The boy who was singing. What's his name? Malik, I believe, the flight attendant replied. Would you like me to pass along a message? Evelyn hesitated. What could she say? Thank you for showing me up? Thank you for proving I'm a failure as a mother? Thank you for having the one thing my baby needs that I can't provide? She started, then stopped. Charlotte made a small sound, and Evelyn looked down at her daughter. What song is he singing? The one that keeps calming her down. The flight attendant smiled. I'll ask him. She made her way back to row 32, leaning down to speak quietly with Malik. Evelyn watched the interaction, saw the boy's shy response, the way he ducked his head when spoken to. He was just a kid who happened to have a gift her daughter responded to in a way she'd never responded to anything else. The flight attendant returned. He says it's called Bright Morning Star, but it's his grandmother's version. She taught it to him when he was little. His grandmother's version, Evelyn repeated softly. She looked down at Charlotte, who was now peacefully playing with her own fingers, occasionally babbling in that sweet baby way that made everything else fade into the background. What makes it special? The grandmother's version? He says she changed it to fit their story. Added verses about getting through hard times, about finding light in darkness. She told him every family should have their own version of the old songs, to fit their own journey. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Every family should have their own version. But what was her family's version? What songs did she know to sing to her daughter? Her own mother had hired nannies for such things. Evelyn had been raised on schedules and efficiency, not lullabies and folk songs. Ma'am, the flight attendant said gently. He also said, he said you sing for the room first, then for the heart. His grandmother taught him that too. What does that mean? I think, the flight attendant said carefully, it means you have to make peace with where you are before you can reach who you're trying to comfort. You have to be calm to give calm. Evelyn turned this over in her mind as the flight attendant moved on to other passengers. Sing for the room first, then for the heart. Be calm to give calm. But how could she be calm when she felt like she was drowning every single day? When her husband criticized every decision, when the other mothers in her social circle seemed to manage everything effortlessly, when Charlotte seemed to resist her at every turn. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and several passengers gasped. Charlotte startled, her face crumpling toward tears. But before the first cry could escape, Malik's humming grew slightly louder, adding a rhythmic quality that seemed to match the plane's movement. It was like he was incorporating the turbulence into the song, making it part of the music instead of something to fear. Charlotte relaxed again, and Evelyn found herself studying the boy more carefully. He couldn't be more than 13 or 14, but there was something old about him. Not in his face, which was still soft with youth, but in his manner. The way he held himself, careful and contained. The way he seemed to be constantly making himself smaller, less noticeable. The way he sang like it was breathing, natural and necessary. What had his life been like, she wondered, to produce such a gift? And why did it seem touched with such sadness? As the turbulence settled and the captain announced they were cruising at altitude, Evelyn made a decision. She carefully stood up with Charlotte and made her way back toward economy. Several passengers watched her progress with interest. The wealthy woman who'd been sitting beside her smirked, probably thinking Evelyn was about to make a scene. But when Evelyn reached row 32, she simply stood in the aisle for a moment, uncertain. Malik looked up at her with those dark, careful eyes, and she saw him brace himself as if expecting another scolding. She started, then had to clear her throat. What you're doing, I just wanted to say. The words stuck. Thank you seemed too small. I'm sorry seemed too vulnerable. Charlotte decided for her. The baby reached out toward Malik with both chubby arms, babbling excitedly. And then, clear as day, she made a sound that might have been ma, or might have been the beginning of music. But either way, it was directed entirely at this boy she'd never met before today. She likes you, Evelyn said finally, and if it wasn't exactly thank you or I'm sorry, at least it was true. Malik ducked his head, but she caught the tiny smile that flashed across his face. She's a sweet baby, he said softly. She just needed to hear something familiar. But she's never heard that song before, Evelyn pointed out. No, Ms. Lila interjected gently. But she's heard love before, and that's what the boy sings with. Love. It translates across any language, any melody. Evelyn stood there for another moment, holding her calm, content baby, looking at this boy who'd given her daughter peace. She wanted to ask him to teach her the song. She wanted to offer him money. She wanted to do something, anything, to balance the scales between them. But before she could figure out what to say, the plane hit another patch of turbulence, this one more severe. The captain's voice came over the intercom, asking all passengers to return to their seats immediately. As Evelyn made her way back to business class, she heard Malik's humming following her, a ribbon of sound that seemed to wrap around Charlotte like a blanket. And for the first time since her daughter had been born, Evelyn didn't feel like she was failing. She felt like she was learning. The plane steadied after the turbulence, and the seatbelt sign flickered off. Evelyn exhaled slowly, still feeling the ghost of the planes shaking in her bones. Charlotte remained peaceful against her shoulder, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to echo Malik's melody. It was the longest her daughter had been calm since they'd left Chicago. Thank goodness that's over, the wealthy woman beside her commented, smoothing her silk blouse. Though I must say, it's fortunate that boy back there has such an effect on your little one. Otherwise, we'd all be suffering through the turbulence and screaming. Evelyn forced herself to respond politely. Yes, fortunate. Back in row 32, Malik accepted a package of pretzels from Ms. Lila, who'd insisted he needed to eat something. His stomach had been in knots since yesterday, thinking about tomorrow's audition. The Manhattan Conservatory of Music only held these open auditions once a year. If he missed it, or if he wasn't good enough, that door would close forever. You traveling alone, sweetie? Ms. Lila asked gently. My aunt put me on the plane in Chicago. My other aunt, Keisha, she's picking me up in New York. He carefully opened the pretzels, trying not to scatter crumbs. She lives in Brooklyn, works double shifts at the hospital, but she got tomorrow morning off to take me to the audition. Audition, Malik nodded, a flicker of excitement breaking through his careful composure. The Manhattan Conservatory. They have a scholarship program for kids who can't afford regular tuition. Full ride if you get in. Classes, even housing assistance during the school year. That's wonderful, Ms. Lila said, though she noticed how his hands trembled slightly. Your grandmother would be proud. She's the one who sent in the application, Malik said softly, before she got too sick. Said I had something that shouldn't be wasted. He stared at his hands. I just hope I don't mess it up. A teenage girl across the aisle had been listening. She leaned over with interest. Wait, you're auditioning for MCM? That's like impossible to get into. My cousin tried 3 times. Malik shrank back slightly. I know it a long shot. No, I mean, the girl gestured vaguely. You're obviously talented. That thing with the baby? That was incredible. How long have you been training? I haven't, Malik admitted. Never had formal lessons. Just sang in church with my grandma around the neighborhood. The girl's eyes widened. And you're auditioning for MCM with no training? That's... She trailed off, perhaps realizing how her words might sound. Brave, Ms. Lila finished firmly. That's brave. In business class, Evelyn was fighting her own battle. Charlotte had started fussing again, not crying yet, but the warning signs were there. The wealthy woman beside her watched with barely concealed judgment as Evelyn tried the bottle, the pacifier, gentle rocking. You know, the woman said, her tone conversational, but her words sharp. I raised 3 children, and they never carried on like this in public. Of course, I was able to be home with them. No career distractions. Children can sense when they're not the priority. Evelyn's jaw clenched. She wanted to explain that she'd taken leave from her job, that Charlotte had been her only focus for 6 months, that she'd given up everything to be the perfect mother. But what was the point? This woman had already decided who Evelyn was. The businessman from earlier returned to his seat, having apparently complained his way through the entire business class section without finding satisfaction. He shot Evelyn a look of disgust as Charlotte's fussing grew louder. Still can't manage her. I see, he said, not quite under his breath. That's when Ms. Lila appeared in the business class aisle, having made her way forward. Flight attendants usually prevented economy passengers from entering business class, but something about Ms. Lila's dignified bearing made them step aside. "Excuse me," she said to Evelyn, her voice warm but firm. "I couldn't help but notice you're struggling a bit. Babies can sense tension, you know. Makes them tense too." "I'm fine," Evelyn said automatically, though Charlotte's increasing distress suggested otherwise. Ms. Lila studied her for a moment. "No, honey, you're not. And that's okay. Being a mother is the hardest job in the world, especially when you're trying to do it alone." "I'm not alone," Evelyn protested. "My husband." "Is where exactly?" Ms. Lila asked gently. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Business trip. Tokyo. He's closing a major deal." Hum. Ms. Lila's tone held no judgment, but somehow that made it worse. "Well, that young man back there, Malik, his grandmother raised him alone too. His mother passed when he was 2. Father was never in the picture. Alma did everything herself, working 3 jobs to keep food on the table." We're not. Evelyn struggled to explain that her situation was different, that she had money, resources, advantages that Malik's grandmother could never have dreamed of. "Struggling is struggling," Ms. Lila said simply. "Doesn't matter if it's in a mansion or a 1-bedroom apartment. That baby feels what you feel. And right now you're drowning." The businessman scoffed. "This is business class. We don't need economy passengers coming up here with their folksy wisdom." Ms. Lila turned to him slowly, her eyes sharp. "Sir, I've been an educator for 40 years. I've taught at Juilliard, Berkeley, and yes, even a Manhattan Conservatory. I suspect I've forgotten more about human nature than you've ever bothered to learn. Now, would you like to continue embarrassing yourself, or shall I return to my seat?" The businessman's face went red, but he turned away, muttering into his phone. Ms. Lila turned back to Evelyn. "That boy back there? He's got a gift, but it's not just his voice. It's empathy. He feels what others feel and gives them what they need. Your daughter recognizes that. Babies are smarter than we give them credit for. But why can't I do that?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "Why can't I give her what she needs?" "Maybe because nobody ever taught you how," Ms. Lila said kindly. "What lullabies did your mother sing to you?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "She didn't. We had nannies for that. And there it is." Ms. Lila patted Evelyn's shoulder gently. "Can't give what you never got. But you can learn. That boy back there, he'd teach you if you asked. Pride's a cold comfort when your baby's crying." With that, Ms. Lila made her way back to economy, leaving Evelyn to sit with her words. Charlotte was crying again now, the sound drilling into Evelyn's skull. She thought about her own childhood, the beautiful nursery she'd barely spent time in, the rotating cast of nannies, the boarding school that started when she was 7. Her parents had given her everything except themselves. And now here she was, with all the money in the world, unable to give her daughter the one thing she needed. Comfort. From economy, she heard again. Malik's voice, rising soft and sure. Charlotte's cries stuttered, stopped, transformed into a pleased gurgle. The baby turned her head, searching for the source of the sound. And when she couldn't find it, she reached out with both arms toward the back of the plane. "You want to go to him, don't you?" Evelyn whispered to her daughter. "You want him, not me." The resentment that flashed through her was ugly and immediately followed by shame. How could she be jealous of a 13-year-old boy? But she was jealous of how easily he did what she couldn't, of how naturally it came to him, of how her daughter responded to him like he was magic. Back in economy, Malik had pulled out his boarding pass, smoothing it against his tray table. The edges were soft from handling, and across the back, in pencil, he'd written musical notes. Not a formal composition. He didn't know how to write music properly, but his own system for remembering melodies. "What's that?" the teenage girl asked, leaning over to look. "Just songs," Malik said shyly. "Things my grandma sang. I've been trying to write them down, so I don't forget." Ms. Lila looked at the makeshift notation with interest. "You developed your own system?" "Had to. Can't afford music theory books, and the library's copies are always checked out." He traced one line of notes with his finger. "This one's Bright Morning Star, but the way Grandma sang it." She added a verse about finding your way home in the dark. "May I?" Ms. Lila asked, and when Malik nodded, she hummed the melody he'd written. Her voice was older, scratchier than his, but still beautiful. "Oh, that's lovely. That little turn in the bridge, that's pure Chicago blues influence. Grandma said her mother learned it from her mother, and on back," Malik explained. Each one added something of their own time to it. "Living history," Ms. Lila murmured. "That's what these songs are. Living history." The plane intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into the New York area. We should be on the ground in about 45 minutes. Malik's stomach clenched. 45 minutes until New York. Then the race to get to Brooklyn, sleep somehow despite his nerves, and make it to the conservatory by 9 a.m. His whole future balanced on tomorrow morning. The announcement about landing seemed to shift the energy in the cabin. People started gathering their things, checking phones for messages they'd missed while in airplane mode. The flight attendants moved through with practiced efficiency, collecting trash and securing service items. One of them stopped at Malik's row with a warm smile. "The crew wanted to thank you," she said, offering him a pair of premium headphones and a snack box from business class. "What you did earlier, that was really something special." Malik looked at the gifts uncomfortably. "That's okay, ma'am. I don't need anything." "Please," she insisted. "You made everyone's flight better. It's the least we can do." Malik glanced at Ms. Lila, who gave him an encouraging nod. But then he looked around the economy cabin, at the tired mother 3 rows up wrestling with twin toddlers, at the elderly man across the aisle who'd been coughing the whole flight, at all the people who looked like they needed kindness more than he did. "Could you maybe give it to someone else?" he asked quietly. "Someone who needs it more?" The flight attendant's expression softened. "You're a special young man. Your family must be very proud." Malik's throat tightened. His family was gone, except for his aunts who were stretched thin, trying to help him while managing their own struggles. But he just nodded, not trusting his voice. The businessman in 4B had overheard the exchange, and his expression turned ugly. "Figures," he said, loud enough to carry. "These people always have some trick. Probably sings on street corners for money, too." The casual cruelty of it. These people hung in the air like poison. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away. Others nodded subtle agreement. Malik heard it. Of course he heard it. He'd been hearing variations of it his whole life. He kept his eyes down, his hands folded, making himself smaller the way his grandmother had taught him. "Don't give them a reason," she'd always said. "Dignity is power they can't take from you." But Ms. Lila wasn't having it. She stood up slowly, her full height impressive despite her age. "Sir, that young man has more talent and grace in his little finger than you've displayed this entire flight. Your money might buy you a bigger seat, but it clearly hasn't purchased you any class." "How dare you?" the businessman started. "I dare because I'm old enough to say what everyone else is thinking," Ms. Lila shot back. "Now sit down and be quiet before you embarrass yourself further." The confrontation had raised voices throughout the cabin. Charlotte, sensitive to the tension, began to cry again. But this time it was different, scared crying rather than frustrated crying. The raised voices had frightened her. Malik instinctively began to hum, soft and low, trying to counteract the harsh words with something gentle. But Evelyn, stressed beyond her breaking point and humiliated by her continued dependence on this boy, snapped. She turned around sharply. "Stop it. Just stop. Every time you sing, you make me look more incompetent. Can't you see that? You're making things worse." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, powered by exhaustion and shame and the pressure of all those watching eyes. She saw Malik flinch as if she'd slapped him, saw him pull back into himself, and immediately wanted to take it back. But pride held her tongue. Malik went silent, completely silent. He folded his hands in his lap and stared at them, his whole body radiating hurt. Ms. Lila put a protective hand on his shoulder, but he didn't respond. And Charlotte, as if someone had flipped a switch, erupted into the worst crying yet. Not just crying, screaming. The kind of screaming that made other babies start crying too, that made people wince and cover their ears, that turned the entire plane into a cacophony of distress. "Great," The businessman said sarcastically. Just great. This is exactly what we all needed. Evelyn tried everything. Bouncing, rocking, singing badly, the bottle, the pacifier, toys, walking the aisle despite the seatbelt sign coming on. Nothing worked. Charlotte's face went red, then purple. Her little body went rigid with distress. The screaming took on a desperate quality that made everyone uncomfortable. Other passengers were openly annoyed now. Even those who'd been sympathetic earlier were reaching their limits. Someone muttered about birth control advertisements. Another passenger loudly asked if there was a quieter section of the plane. The flight attendants converged on Evelyn, trying to help, but their attempts only seemed to make things worse. Charlotte was beyond consolation, beyond exhaustion, lost in a spiral of baby hysteria that fed on itself. "Ma'am," one flight attendant said gently, "we're about to land. She needs to be in her seat." "I can't." "She won't." Evelyn was near tears herself. "I don't know what to do." Another flight attendant looked back toward economy, where Malik sat silent and still. "Maybe if the young man—" "No," Evelyn said sharply, her pride flaring. "I can handle my own child." But she couldn't. Charlotte's screaming intensified, if that was even possible. She started doing that hitching breath thing that babies do when they've cried too hard for too long, gasping between screams. "This is ridiculous," the businessman announced. "I'm filing a complaint with the airline. This is completely unacceptable." "Sir, please," a flight attendant started. "No, I paid $4,000 for this ticket. I shouldn't have to deal with this chaos." More passengers joined in the complaints. The cabin devolved into arguments, some defending Evelyn, others attacking her, everyone talking over Charlotte's continued screaming. And through it all, Malik sat silent in row 32, his eyes fixed on his hands. Ms. Lila could see the struggle in him, the desire to help warring with the hurt of being rejected. His grandmother had taught him to help when he could, but she'd also taught him not to go where he wasn't wanted. "Baby," Ms. Lila said softly, "sometimes doing right means risking being wrong." Malik looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She doesn't want my help." "No," Ms. Lila agreed. "But that little one needs it." Charlotte's gasping had taken on a concerning quality. The flight attendant who'd been trained as an EMT moved quickly to check her, making sure she wasn't choking. "She's working herself into a state," she announced. "This kind of prolonged crying can be dangerous for babies." That changed the atmosphere. The complaining stopped. Everyone watched as the flight attendant tried to calm Charlotte, but the baby was beyond reaching. Evelyn looked around desperately, her pride finally cracking under the weight of genuine fear for her daughter. Her eyes found Malik, still silent in his seat, still hurt from her words. "Please," she said, and the word cost her everything. "Please help her." Malik hesitated. The hurt was still fresh, the sting of her rejection still sharp. But then Charlotte let out a gasping sob that sounded so lost, so desperate, that his hands moved of their own accord. He stood up slowly, Ms. Lila giving him an encouraging pat. The businessman started to say something, but the combined glares of half the plane shut him down. Malik made his way forward, past all the watching eyes, past the judgment and the expectation and the weight of being the only one who could fix this. When he reached Evelyn, he didn't look at her. He looked at Charlotte. "Hey, little one," he said softly. "Remember me?" Charlotte was too far gone to respond, but Malik didn't seem to expect her to. He started with the humming, not the lullaby from before, but something even simpler. Just a single note, held long and steady, like the drone of a meditation bowl. "Breathe with the sound," he told Evelyn quietly, still not looking at her. "She needs to feel calm from you too." Evelyn wanted to protest that she'd been trying to be calm, but something in Malik's tone stopped her. She tried to match her breathing to the long, sustained note he was humming. Slowly, impossibly, Charlotte's gasps began to space out. The screaming softened to crying, the crying to whimpers. Malik gradually shaped the single note into a melody, simple and repetitive, something that seemed to work with the rhythm of breathing rather than against it. "There you go," he whispered to Charlotte. "That's it. You're okay. Everything's okay." Charlotte hiccuped once, twice, then fell silent except for shuddering breaths. Her eyes, swollen from crying, found Malik's face and locked on. "Want to try something?" Malik asked Evelyn. "Hum with me. Doesn't matter if you're good. This has to come from you." Evelyn looked at him uncertainly. "I can't sing. Not singing. Just humming. Like this." He demonstrated a simple two-note pattern that anyone could manage. "She needs to hear that you're okay. That's what makes her okay." Evelyn tried. Her voice was weak, uncertain, nothing like Malik's natural gift. But Charlotte turned her head slightly, looking at her mother with surprise. "Keep going," Malik encouraged. "You're doing great." As Evelyn continued the simple humming, Malik gradually withdrew his voice, letting hers take over. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't even particularly on key. But Charlotte was listening, really listening, to her mother for the first time all flight. "See," Malik said softly, "she doesn't need perfect. She just needs you." The plane had gone quiet, everyone watching this strange little scene. The teenage boy teaching the wealthy woman how to comfort her own baby. Some watched with judgment, others with sympathy, but most with a kind of fascination. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." Malik looked at Evelyn. "You've got this now. Just keep humming." He turned to go back to his seat. "Wait," Evelyn said. "I'm sorry. What I said earlier." "It's okay," Malik said, though they both knew it wasn't. "Just take care of her." As he walked back to economy, several passengers patted his shoulder or murmured thanks. Even some who'd been cruel earlier seemed chastened. The businessman turned his face to the window, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Malik slid back into his seat beside Ms. Lila, who squeezed his hand gently. "Proud of you," she said simply. As the plane descended toward New York, Malik could hear Evelyn's still humming, off-key but determined. And beneath that, Charlotte's contented babbling, finally at peace. The plane touched down with a gentle bump that barely registered over Charlotte's renewed distress. The landing had disrupted the fragile peace, and her breathing had become shallow and hitched, each tiny gasp making Evelyn's heart race with panic. "She's not getting enough air," Evelyn said, her voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong." The flight attendant with EMT training was there immediately, kneeling in the aisle despite the plane still taxiing. She placed gentle fingers on Charlotte's chest, watching the rise and fall. "She's worked herself up too much. It's not choking. It's a combination of crying exhaustion and cabin pressure. We need to calm her breathing rhythm. What do I do?" Evelyn's hands shook as she held Charlotte upright as instructed. From economy, Malik had stood without thinking, but then hesitated. He looked at Ms. Lila, uncertainty clear in his eyes. After Evelyn's earlier rejection, he wasn't sure if his help would be welcomed. "May I help?" he asked softly, directing the question to the flight attendant rather than Evelyn. "I might know something that could work." This time he waited. No assumptions, no pushing forward. He stood in the aisle between economy and business class like he was waiting for permission to cross a border. Evelyn's eyes met his, and for a moment, her pride warred with her fear. Then Charlotte gasped again, that awful hitching sound, and nothing mattered except her baby. "Please," she whispered, and this time the word came easier. "Please help her." Malik moved forward slowly, calmly, like approaching a frightened animal. He knelt beside Evelyn's seat, putting himself at Charlotte's eye level. "Hey there, little star," he said softly. "Having a tough time breathing?" He didn't immediately start singing. Instead, he began demonstrating a slow, exaggerated breathing pattern. In through his nose, hold, out through his mouth with a soft hum sound. "This is called vagus breathing," he explained to Evelyn. "Grandma learned it from a nurse at the clinic. The humming on the exhale helps reset the nervous system." "How do you know all this?" the flight attendant asked, impressed. "Grandma had breathing problems near the end," Malik said simply. "We learned together." He placed his hand near Charlotte's tiny chest, not touching, just close enough for her to feel the warmth. "Breathe with me, little one." In hold hum. The humming was low, steady, almost more vibration than sound. Evelyn watched, mesmerized, as Malik patiently repeated the pattern. After a few cycles, he nodded to her. You try. She needs to feel it from you. I don't. You do. Same as before. Copy me. His voice held no judgment, only encouragement. Evelyn placed her hand over Charlotte's chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her daughter's heartbeat. She tried to match Malik's breathing pattern. In hold hum, the vibration felt strange in her chest, but Charlotte's eyes flickered toward her. Good, Malik said. Keep going. Make the hum lower if you can. Babies respond to lower frequencies. It reminds them of the womb. The flight attendant added a warm compress near Charlotte's ear. This helps with any pressure pain, she explained. You're doing great, Mom. Slowly, miraculous inch by inch, Charlotte's breathing began to regulate. The gasping stopped. The rigid tension in her tiny body released. Her eyes, still wet with tears, moved between Malik and Evelyn with something like recognition. Ms. Lila had made her way forward, moving with surprising grace for her age. That's it, she said softly. Mothers learn their songs over time, dear. You're learning yours. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. The kindness from this stranger, after everything, undid something tight in her chest. I don't know any songs, she admitted. My mother never. We didn't do lullabies. Then you make new ones, Ms. Lila said firmly. Every generation gets to start fresh if they need to. The businessman in 4B muttered something about disruption and this whole production, but the passengers around him actually shushed him. One woman said pointedly she was helping a baby in distress. What's your excuse? He grumbled something about overreacting and turned to face the window, his face red with embarrassment rather than anger now. A flight attendant approached with a suggestion. We have an empty bulkhead seat in Economy Plus. Would you like to move the young man closer for the taxi to the gate? Just in case. It was framed as a medical precaution, not a spectacle. Evelyn nodded immediately. Yes, please. As Malik gathered his things, Evelyn caught his arm gently. The song, your grandmother's song. What's it really called? She just called it Grandma's Hum, Malik said. But she told me something once. She said you sing for the room first, then for the heart. Like, you have to make peace with where you are before you can reach who you're trying to comfort. Sing for the room first. Evelyn repeated slowly, like tasting unfamiliar words. I think I understand. As they settled into the new configuration, Malik in the bulkhead seat across from Evelyn, Charlotte reached out one chubby hand toward him. Her fingers opened and closed in that baby way that meant want. She recognizes you, Evelyn said with wonder. She's never done that with anyone except. She trailed off, unwilling to admit that Charlotte had never even done that with her father, who was always too busy to hold her for long. Babies remember kindness, Ms. Lila said, settling into the seat beside Malik. They're pure that way. As the plane slowly made its way to the gate, Malik hummed softly, not performing, just breathing in melody. Evelyn found herself following along, her voice uncertain but growing stronger. Charlotte's eyes grew heavy, her breath evening out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Don't lose that, Evelyn said suddenly, pointing to Malik's boarding pass sticking out of his pocket, covered in penciled musical notes. Whatever those songs are, don't lose them. I won't, Malik promised, tucking it deeper into his pocket. They're all I have left of her. The plane finally stopped at the gate, and the usual chaos of deplaning began. But their little section stayed calm, moved by something that felt bigger than just a flight. As passengers began gathering their belongings, the captain's voice came over the intercom one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that due to severe weather systems moving through the area, we may experience some delays in ground transportation. Please check with your airlines for any connecting flight updates. Malik's stomach dropped. Delays. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. It was already 8 p.m. The audition was at 9 a.m. tomorrow. He had to get to Brooklyn, somehow sleep despite his nerves, and make it back to Manhattan by morning. With Charlotte finally sleeping peacefully, Evelyn felt safe enough to really look at the boy who'd saved her sanity. He was thin, too thin, like he'd grown recently and his weight hadn't caught up. His clothes were clean but worn, carefully maintained. Everything about him spoke of someone taking care with limited resources. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Why are you really going to New York? Malik hesitated, then, perhaps deciding she'd earned some truth, said, "Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I have an audition at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. It's for their scholarship program." MCM. Evelyn straightened. "That's incredibly prestigious." "Yeah." Malik's voice was barely audible. "It's my only shot. If I don't get in, or if I miss the audition." He shrugged, trying to seem casual about something that was anything but. "What do you mean, miss it? They only do these open auditions once a year. If you're late, doors close. No exceptions." He checked his phone again. "My Aunt Keisha is supposed to pick me up, but she's coming from Brooklyn after a 12-hour shift at the hospital." Ms. Lila had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "You know, I used to lead workshops at MCM. I might still know some people there." Malik's eyes widened. "You taught there?" "Among other places. I led the community choir program for 20 years. She studied him thoughtfully. "Your grandmother, Alma Williams. I've been trying to place why that name sounds familiar. I think she might have sung in one of our outreach programs. We did a lot of work on the South Side in the 70s. She mentioned a choir," Malik said eagerly. "Said it was the best time of her life before things got hard." "I'll check my old rosters when I get home," Ms. Lila promised. "But tell me about this audition. What's your repertoire?" "2 pieces. Bright Morning Star in Grandma's arrangement, and an art song I learned from a library CD. Sure, On This Shining Night by Samuel Barber." "Barber?" Ms. Lila's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious without training." "I listened to it about 1,000 times," Malik admitted. "Try to copy exactly what I heard." Suddenly, the plane lurched slightly, just ground movement, but the businessman in 4B went pale. He pressed a hand to his chest, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Are you all right, sir?" a flight attendant asked. I can't." He was gasping now, his face flushed. A passenger who identified himself as a physician checked him quickly. "Not a heart attack," he announced. "Panic attack. Sir, you need to slow your breathing." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same man who'd been so dismissive was now in the exact same kind of breathing crisis Charlotte had experienced. Several passengers exchanged looks. Malik watched for a moment, then quietly began the same humming pattern he'd used with Charlotte. Not directed at the businessman, just filling the space with calm sound. The man's eyes darted to him, and for a moment, pride warred with need on his face. "Copy the rhythm," the physician instructed, "and hold out. Match the humming if it helps." The businessman reluctantly tried to match Malik's pattern. His breathing slowly regulated, his color returning to normal. He didn't say thank you, couldn't seem to make himself, but he stopped glaring at Malik. That was something. Another announcement crackled through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're being held at the gate due to weather. There's a severe thunderstorm system approaching. We ask for your patience." Malik's hands clenched. Every minute here was a minute closer to missing his audition. Evelyn noticed his distress. "Do you have the conservatory's contact information?" she asked. "I tried calling earlier. Just got voicemail. Let me try something." Evelyn pulled out her phone, buying the expensive in-flight Wi-Fi without hesitation. She began searching for the program director's information, her marketing executive skills kicking in. Email addresses, alternative contacts, social media. She tried everything. "Here," she said finally. "The admissions office has an emergency email for weather-related issues. Let me write to them." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her tone brooked no argument. She began typing rapidly, her professional voice coming through even in email. Subject: weather delay, urgent audition request from Malik Thompson. Dear MCM Admissions Committee, I am writing on behalf of Malik Thompson, a remarkably gifted young musician scheduled for tomorrow morning's scholarship audition. Due to severe weather delays, there is concern about his ability to reach the conservatory by 9 a.m. She attached her business card information, knowing that her company's name might carry weight. There, if nothing else, they'll know you tried to communicate. Ms. Lila had another idea. "We should document your voice. Timestamp proof of your ability in case you need it." "Ow!" "Phone video. Cool me." She led him to the galley area where it was quieter. Evelyn followed with Charlotte, who had woken but remained calm. "I get nervous recording," Malik admitted. "Then don't think of it as recording," Ms. Lila said. Sing for Charlotte. She's your audience. Evelyn held up her phone, using the flashlight to illuminate Malik's face. He looked at Charlotte, who was watching him with those serious baby eyes, and began to sing. Not the full songs, just 45 seconds of pure, clear tone that seemed to transform the cramped galley into a cathedral. At the end, Charlotte made a happy, gurgling sound that might have been trying to sing along. All three adults laughed. That's conservatory-level placement, Ms. Lila said quietly. That's real talent meeting real technique, even self-taught. Evelyn immediately uploaded the video to the email thread, adding, "Please find attached a brief sample of Mr. Thompson's extraordinary voice. We request your consideration for a later audition time, should weather prevent punctual arrival." The plane finally began moving again, but backward. They were returning to the gate due to the storm. The captain announced they'd be held for at least an hour. Malik's Aunt Keisha called, stuck in traffic made worse by the storm. "Baby, I'm trying, but the roads are flooding. It might be past midnight before I can get there." Evelyn made a decision. "My car service will take you. Both of you," she said, including Ms. Lila, "wherever you need to go." "We can't accept," Malik began. "You can and you will." Evelyn's tone was firm. "You saved my sanity and possibly my daughter's health today. This is the least I can do." Her phone rang. Her assistant. "Mrs. Whitmore, just reminding you about the charity gala tonight. Your husband's already there with the Japanese clients." Evelyn looked at Charlotte, peaceful in her arms, then at Malik, this boy who'd taught her more about motherhood in 5 hours than she'd learned in 6 months. "Tell them I'm unavailable," she said clearly. But Mr. Whitmore specifically said, "Tell him I'm being a mother. He'll have to handle it alone for once." She hung up. Ms. Lila smiled approvingly. "Good for you." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the plane's windows. Lightning flickered across the tarmac. Malik watched it all, calculating distances, time, the impossibility of it all. "We'll get you there," Evelyn said firmly. "I promise." "Why?" Malik asked suddenly. "Why do you care if I make it?" Evelyn considered the question. "Because you didn't have to help me. You didn't have to be kind when I was horrible to you. You didn't have to teach me that stupid, simple humming that finally worked. You gave me something I couldn't buy, couldn't earn with my degrees or my connections. The least I can do is try to give you your shot." The email pinged. The conservatory had responded. "Thank you for your message. While we cannot guarantee accommodation, please have Mr. Thompson arrive as early as possible. We will note the weather situation." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. "That's something," Ms. Lila said encouragingly. As they waited for the storm to pass, an odd little family formed in the strange liminal space of a grounded plane. Evelyn taught Charlotte to clap to Malik's humming. Ms. Lila told stories about her choir days, about young voices she'd trained who'd gone on to great things. Even some of the other passengers joined in, sharing their own stories of missed chances and second opportunities. The businessman remained silent, but he was listening. Once, when Charlotte laughed at something Malik did, the man almost smiled before catching himself. Finally, after 2 hours, the captain announced they could deplane. As they gathered their things, Malik clutched his boarding pass with its penciled notes. "Remember," Ms. Lila said, "tomorrow morning, you sing for the room first. Let them know you belong there. Then you sing for the heart. Show them who you really are." "What if I'm not good enough?" Malik asked, his youth showing through for the first time. "Oh, baby," Ms. Lila said, "you're already good enough. Tomorrow's just about letting them see it." As they made their way up the jet bridge, Charlotte reached for Malik one more time. He let her grab his finger, her tiny hand holding on tight. "See?" Evelyn said. "She knows. Babies always know." The storm was still raging outside, but somehow it didn't seem as threatening anymore. The rain was still coming down in sheets as they exited the airport. Evelyn's car service, a black SUV with a driver who didn't blink at the unusual collection of passengers, was waiting at arrival's C. Malik hesitated at the door, his worn sneakers already soaked from the short dash from the terminal. "Get in," Evelyn said firmly, Charlotte bundled against her chest in a carrier. "We don't have time for pride." Ms. Lila was already settling into the back seat. "Driver, we need to get to Brooklyn first, then back to Manhattan by morning. In this weather? The driver looked skeptical. The FDR is flooded. Brooklyn Bridge is down to one lane. Malik's phone buzzed. Aunt Keisha's text. Baby, I'm so sorry. Streets are rivers. Can't get through. Stay safe. We'll meet you in morning. She can't make it, Malik said quietly, defeat creeping into his voice. Evelyn was already on her phone, pulling up hotel options. There's a Marriott near the conservatory. I'll book you a room. I can't. You can. She was in full executive mode now, solving problems with the efficiency that had made her successful. Ms. Lila, would you mind staying with him? I'll book a suite, 2 beds, in your name. Ms. Lila nodded. I'd be honored. Evelyn's phone rang. Her husband. She looked at it for a long moment, then declined the call. Another ring immediately. This time her assistant. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband insists. Tell him I'm handling a medical situation with Charlotte, Evelyn said calmly. Tell him I'll call when I can. But the Yamamoto account will survive one evening without me. She hung up. The driver navigated through the storm with practiced skill, but progress was slow. Every few minutes, Malik checked the time on his phone. 11:42 p.m. 11:53 p.m. 12:14 nachts. We should go straight to the hotel, Ms. Lila suggested. You need rest more than you need your things from Brooklyn. My good shirt is there, Malik said anxiously. The one Grandma bought me for special occasions. Sweetheart, Ms. Lila said gently, they're not auditioning your shirt. They pulled up to the Marriott at 1:47 a.m. The lobby was bright and calm, a stark contrast to the storm outside. Evelyn handled the check-in with her credit card, waving off Malik's protests. Room 412, she told them. I've arranged a 7 a.m. wake-up call and breakfast sent to the room at 7:30. You don't have to. Malik. Evelyn's voice was firm but kind. Let someone help you. It's not weakness. I learned that today from a 13-year-old boy who helped me when I was too proud to ask. Charlotte, who'd been dozing, woke enough to reach for Malik again. He let her grab his finger. See you in the morning, little star, he whispered. They agreed to meet in the lobby at 8:15 a.m. The conservatory was only 10 minutes away, but nobody wanted to risk being late. In the hotel room, Ms. Lila insisted Malik shower and try to sleep, but he was too wound up, sitting by the window watching the storm slowly exhaust itself over Manhattan. Tell me about your grandmother, Ms. Lila said, sitting in the chair beside him. She was everything, Malik said simply. Mom died when I was 2, car accident. Dad was never around. Grandma took me in without hesitation, even though she was already working 3 jobs just to keep her apartment. What kind of work? Cleaning offices at night. Kitchen prep at a diner in the mornings. Weekends at a laundromat. He smiled sadly. But Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, she sang in the church choir. Said those were the hours that kept her soul alive. And she taught you everything. Not just singing. How to be in the world. How to stay soft when everything around you is hard. How to find beauty even when you're hungry. His voice caught. She was saving for my future. Every penny she could. Then she got sick, and it all went to medical bills that didn't even save her. Ms. Lila reached over and took his hand. But she saved something better in you. That voice, that gift, that's her legacy. What if I mess up tomorrow? What if I forget the words or my voice cracks? Or, then you'll be human, Ms. Lila said firmly. And that's what the best music is. Human beings telling the truth about being human. They finally slept a little. Malik curled in one bed while Ms. Lila took the other. But by 6 a.m., he was up, warming up his voice in the bathroom, trying not to wake her. At 7:45 a.m., they were in the lobby. Evelyn was already there with Charlotte and, surprisingly, coffee in a bag from a nearby bakery. You need energy, she said, pressing a croissant into Malik's reluctant hands. And Charlotte wanted to wish you luck. The baby was alert and cheerful, babbling at Malik like she was giving him a pep talk. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick. They drove in nervous silence, Malik humming scales under his breath. At 8:47 a.m., they pulled up to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. The building was intimidating, all glass and dignity, The kind of place that whispered you don't belong here to kids like Malik. The security guard at the door looked at his list. Auditions don't start until 9. We're aware, Ms. Lila said in her teacher voice. Mr. Thompson is on the list. The guard checked again, then shrugged. Doors don't open until 9. Policy. Malik's shoulders sagged. They'd come so far, done everything right, and now they had to wait outside like, "Excuse me." A young man appeared in the doorway, an assistant of some kind. "Are you Malik Thompson?" "Yes, sir. We got an email about you. About the weather delays." He looked at Evelyn. "You're the one who sent the video?" "I am." The assistant looked conflicted. "I'm not supposed to." "But Dr. Harrison, she's the head of the vocal program. She saw the video this morning. She wants to hear you." "But the doors are closed, yes. But she's inside, and she makes the rules." He held the door open. "Just you, though. The others have to wait." Malik looked back at his small support group. Ms. Lila, Evelyn, even little Charlotte. "Go," Evelyn said. "We'll be right here." The lobby was vast, all marble and echo. Malik's footsteps seemed impossibly loud. The assistant led him to a small rehearsal room where a woman with silver hair and keen eyes waited. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I understand you've had quite a journey." "Yes, ma'am. I also understand you have no formal training." "No, ma'am." "Then let's hear what you do have." Malik's throat went dry. The room was too bright, too formal, too everything. He thought about running. Then he heard it. From somewhere outside, through the walls, came a faint humming. The two-note pattern Evelyn had learned on the plane. She was out there, humming his grandmother's technique, reminding him to breathe. He breathed. It holed out. "I'll start with Bright Morning Star," he said. "My grandmother's arrangement." The first note almost didn't come. Then he thought of Charlotte reaching for him, of Ms. Lila's steady presence, of Evelyn learning to hum for her baby. He sang for the room first, letting his voice fill the space, claiming his right to be there. Then he sang for the heart. The song became everything, his grandmother's struggles, her faith, her love. It became the nights without heat, the days without food, the moments when music was all they had. It became the story of a woman who worked 3 jobs, but still found time to teach her grandson that beauty existed everywhere. When he finished, Dr. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "And the barber?" Malik nodded, centering himself again. Sure, on this shining night was technically harder, requiring control he'd had to teach himself by listening to recordings over and over. But he'd practiced it in the bathroom that morning, and Ms. Lila had helped him with the breathing marks. He sang it clean and pure, no embellishments, letting Barbara's melody speak for itself. He thought of his grandmother's last night, how she'd asked him to sing for her, how her face had relaxed into peace at the sound of his voice. "Do you read music?" Dr. Harrison asked when he finished. "No, ma'am, but I'm learning. I made my own system." He pulled out his boarding pass, showing her the penciled notes. She studied it with interest. "You developed this yourself?" "Had to remember things. Sing this." She handed him a simple score, just 8 measures. Malik studied it, trying to apply what he'd taught himself about intervals. He hummed it first, finding his way, then sang it. Not perfect, but close. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Harrison said slowly, "the scholarship program is highly competitive. Students come here with years of training, with private coaches, with every advantage." Malik's heart sank. "However," she continued, "what they rarely come with is what you just showed me. Raw talent combined with desperate hunger to learn. That's what we can work with." "Does that mean?" "That means I'm recommending you for the program. Full scholarship, including housing assistance through our partnership with Student Services." She smiled for the first time. "Your grandmother would be proud." Malik's knees nearly buckled. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Classes start in 2 weeks. You'll need to work harder than you've ever worked. You'll be behind in theory, in language skills, in almost everything technical. But Mr. Thompson, Malik, you have something that can't be taught. Don't lose it while you're learning the rest." 2 weeks later, Malik stood in the same rehearsal room, but everything was different. He wore the new shirt Evelyn had insisted on buying him. "For your first day," she'd said. Ms. Lila had been there too, with a bag of music theory books she'd pulled from her personal collection. "These got me through Juilliard," she'd said. Now they're yours. The first days were brutal. Everyone else seemed to know things he didn't. Italian terms, sight reading, proper breathing technique that went beyond his grandmother's intuitive lessons. But he remembered what Dr. Harrison had said, work harder than you've ever worked. So he did. First to arrive, last to leave. He practiced in stairwells when the rehearsal rooms were full. He listened to recordings on the donated phone Evelyn had quietly provided, claiming Charlotte had insisted Malik needed it. The other students were a mix, some welcoming, some skeptical of the kid from the South Side, who'd gotten in on raw talent alone. But when he sang, they listened. Even the ones who whispered about charity cases went quiet when he opened his mouth in master class. 3 months in, there was a student showcase. Small, informal, mostly for faculty and a few invited guests. Malik had prepared a simple art song, nothing flashy. But when he walked onto the stage, he saw them. Evelyn with Charlotte on her lap, Ms. Lila in the second row, and surprisingly, his Aunt Keisha who'd gotten the night off in the hospital. He started to sing, then stopped. I'm sorry, he said to the audience, but I'd like to sing something else first. Something my grandmother taught me. Dr. Harrison nodded from her seat. Malik began Bright Morning Star, but not just his grandmother's version. Ms. Lila had helped him research the song's history, had found traces of it in slave narratives, in civil rights gatherings, in moments when people needed hope. She'd even found a program from 1978, the Southside Community Choir performing an arrangement by Alma Williams. My grandmother sang this when she was young, Malik told the audience, before life got hard. But she kept singing it anyway, and she taught it to me. Ms. Lila Carter helped me find the history. This is for both of them. He sang it full out, not holding back, letting his voice carry all the weight and beauty of its history. In the audience, Charlotte, now 9 months old, clapped her hands and babbled along. Evelyn was crying openly. Ms. Lila sat with her hands folded, a proud smile on her face. After the performance, there was a small reception. Evelyn's husband had actually shown up, a rare occurrence. He stood stiffly beside his wife, clearly uncomfortable in this world of music and emotion. So you're the boy from the plane? He said to Malik, his tone unreadable. Yes, sir. My wife talks about you constantly. Charlotte, too, in her way. He paused. Oh, you thanks. And an apology. I haven't been present. But seeing what you did for them, seeing how my wife has changed, he cleared his throat. I'm trying to do better. Evelyn touched her husband's arm gently, a gesture of acknowledgement for the effort, even if things weren't perfect yet. Ms. Lila had brought someone with her, an older woman with a worn folder. This is Dorothy Banks, Ms. Lila said. She sang with your grandmother in 1978. Dorothy opened the folder, revealing old photographs. A younger Alma Williams in the center of a choir, radiant with joy. Your grandmama had the purest soprano I ever heard, Dorothy said. But more than that, she had soul. Same as you do. She pulled out a piece of paper, handwritten music. This was hers, an arrangement she was working on before. Well, before life happened, she never got to finish it. Malik took the paper with shaking hands. His grandmother's handwriting, her musical thoughts, a piece of her he'd never known existed. Maybe you can finish it, Dorothy said. Complete the circle. Later, as the reception wound down, Malik found himself outside with his little chosen family. Charlotte was asleep in her stroller, finally on a good schedule thanks to Evelyn learning to hum her to sleep each night. Evelyn had started taking a parent-child music class that Ms. Lila recommended, learning songs to share with her daughter. I have something for you, Evelyn said to Malik, pulling out an envelope. No more gifts. It's not from me. She smiled. Remember the businessman from the plane? Mr. Patterson. Malik remembered. The hostile man who'd made everything harder. He sent this to the airline, asking them to forward it to you. The letter was short. Young man, I was unkind on that flight. Fear makes people cruel, and I was afraid of the crying, of losing control, of looking weak. You showed me grace I didn't deserve when you helped me breathe through my panic. I've enclosed a donation to the conservatory in your grandmother's name, the Alma Williams Thompson Memorial Scholarship. It's not an apology, because some things can't be fixed with money, but maybe it can help another kid like you get their chance. Fly well. Richard Patterson. Malik read it twice, then handed it to Ms. Lila. People can surprise you, she said softly, if you give them the chance to change. A year later, at the conservatory's annual gala, Malik performed with the scholarship students. Evelyn was there with Charlotte, who was walking now, toddling between seats. Her husband was there too, holding his daughter's hand, present in a way he'd learned to be. Ms. Lila had brought a whole table of her former students, all wanting to hear the boy she'd discovered on a plane. Malik sang Barber again, but differently now, with the technique he'd learned, the languages he'd studied, the confidence he'd earned. But underneath it all was still that raw truth his grandmother had given him. Sing for the room first, then for the heart. After the performance, there was one more surprise. Dr. Harrison announced the establishment of the Alma Thompson Community Chorus, funded by the Patterson donation and directed by Ms. Lila Carter. Free for any child from the South Side who wanted to learn. Mr. Thompson will assist during his breaks, Dr. Harrison added, teaching what was taught to him. As Malik stood there, surrounded by applause, he pulled out his old boarding pass, now laminated to preserve the penciled notes. Charlotte Tottle ran to him, arms up, demanding to be held. He picked her up, and she immediately grabbed for the boarding pass, patting it with her little hands. Sing, she said clearly, her first word beside Mama and Dada. So he did. He sang his grandmother's version of Bright Morning Star, now complete with the final verse he'd written using her unfinished arrangement. Through every storm and trial we face, through every tear and pain, the music lives inside our hearts and makes us whole again. The room was silent when he finished, then erupted in applause. But Malik barely heard it. He was thinking of his grandmother, of her 3 jobs and tired hands, of her voice on Sunday mornings, of the gift she'd given him that no hardship could take away. Later, much later, when the gala was over and everyone was leaving, Malik stood outside the conservatory with Ms. Lila and Evelyn. Charlotte was asleep in her stroller, humming in her dreams, the same 2-note pattern her mother had learned on a plane. You know what your grandmother would say? Ms. Lila asked. Sing for the room first, then for the heart, Malik replied. No, Evelyn said softly. She'd say you did it. You took her music and made it fly. A yellow taxi pulled up Malik's ride back to Brooklyn, where he was staying with his aunt until the dorms opened for the new semester. As he got in, he looked back at the conservatory, its windows glowing in the night. Somewhere in the city, in apartments and shelters and churches, other kids like him were humming their own songs, waiting for their chance. Tomorrow, some of them would join the Alma Thompson Community Chorus. They'd learn what he'd learned. That music could bridge any distance, heal any wound, connect any hearts willing to listen. The taxi pulled away, but the song remained, echoing in the spaces between buildings, in the hearts of everyone who'd heard it, in the dreams of a little girl who'd found her mother's voice through a stranger's gift. You sing for the room first, then for the heart. Then you teach others to do the same. That's how the music never dies. What songs are you refusing to share with the world because you think you're not good enough, and who might be desperately waiting to hear exactly what you have to offer? If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us how unexpected connections can change everything.